Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi. This episode is about motivation and intentionally influencing behaviors at work. What inspires and induces you and your team to put the effort in to come up with good or better ideas, to go that extra mile? It's not that modern times are easy or anything about modern work is stable, static, or straightforward. We have the simultaneous stresses of learning and adapting to ongoing changes in progress, meeting goals while adjusting for evolving business conditions and work methods and environments. We need employee-centric approaches to leadership and management. Working in flatter, nimble organizations, now we need trusted and empowered employees who engage in upskilling, ready to respond to new market and customer demands. Research, and especially behavioral economics, give us a wealth of understanding about our clients, with customer-centric models and strategies deployed to discover and delight prospective buyers about our products and services and prompt them to purchase. Now it's time to be implementing employee-centric models to encourage actions that can achieve the higher level, more complex objectives we are now tasked with. I'm delighted to be speaking with Stephan Meier, Professor of Business Strategy at Columbia Business School and author of The Employee Advantage: How Putting Workers First Help Business Thrive. Stephan focuses on issues at the intersection of behavioral economics, business strategy, and the future of work. Hi, Stephan. How are you?
Hi, Sophie. I'm great. Thanks for having me.
I always start at the beginning and how you got here. You are from Switzerland and you started off studying economics. Why economics?
That's right. Yeah, I grew up and born and raised in Switzerland, a small town, and then I started to study history first, and then I switched after my master's degree to economics.
Okay.
The main reason and why I then got fascinated with economics is like in history, and I love history. I love reading about history. I think it's really important to understand it. But it didn't give me enough guidance for myself, to make sense of the world, to kind of predict, what do people do now? Or if we change X law, what would we predict what people are going to do? And so on. And economics has this really strong model. Later I saw like maybe a little bit too strong, but it makes really, really sharp predictions about what people are doing. And that was very, very appealing to me when I was younger. I really wanted to understand, and I still love economics because it does give kind of those predictions. If we change the taxes, what's happened to labor supply? If we change X, Y, and Z, how do people behave when wages go up or down? And we talk about later, I figured out actually, people don't exactly behave like the models that we have in economics, but it was when I started, it was very, very appealing.
Right. Yes. Utility curves seemed a little bit disconnected from people. I totally appreciate that. So then you move from potentially combining economics and history to some degree to study behavioral economics.
Yeah, I then figured out, pretty quickly, with a little bit of introspection, you figure out like, well, those men and women that we have in those economic models, they don't look or act anything like I do. I make a lot of mistakes. Right. I'm like really limited in my rationality, to borrow some terminology from economics. And I'm also not just selfishly interested in making more and more money. I care about social interactions and relationships. And so that's how I started to study, how do people deviate from those models? And I think they deviate in two ways. One is we're not perfectly rational. We try hard. We try hard to optimize, thinking cost and benefit. But we make mistakes all the time, and those mistakes are very predictable, and I hardly learn from them. Every summer, I don't teach in the summer, so I make plans of what I'm going to achieve in the summer.
Okay.
Every summer, I make like a list of like those 10 things, finish this paper, work on that, read that one,
right.
Do more exercise, do X, Y, and Z. Every single year, I don't finish.
Okay. How far do you get through the list, though?
Well, I get like point number 3 out of 10. But then next year, I make the same mistake again. It's not that next year it's like, oh, now I remember I only get through point 3.
Right.
I make a list again of like 10, and I make not through the list anymore. So one is like we deviate from rationality, but the other thing which I really care about as well, we deviate in those economic models. People really care about their self-interest. They mainly care about themselves, often in monetary terms, how much money we make, and so work then becomes important. Work is like a pain. I'm only working for the money, and I'm only care about myself. And when you look at the world, and again, in introspection, I want to believe that I care. I mean, I care about myself. That's true. But I also care about others, what they think about me, how they're doing. You obviously, who work on empathy, can relate a lot about that. We care about how others are doing. And that's not really reflected in those traditional models where people look, in this traditional economic models, they care about themselves, optimize and maximize for themselves. And so that's why I got really interested in like, how do people help each other? When do they, even if it's not in their short-term or even long-term best interest, when do they share information? When do they help each other? So my PhD then in economics was about the economics of non-selfish behavior. So I got interested in, how do people, when do they help? When do they collaborate? Even if it's not contractually obliged or nobody can actually control or make me do it. I'm just volunteer to like help you out and like share and care about you. And what implication does that have then for public policy or like firms as well?
I was speaking with Kelly Monahan, who heads up the Research Institute at Upwork, and her initial research and education in leadership went back to the original management models, which were that people are inherently lazy. And so that idea seems to have some connection with they're motivated by money, they're motivated by self-interest, and they're inherently lazy. So these two things seem to go together. Why do you think that is? And what is it that we needed to learn? What caused us to get to this idea and studying and elevating the importance of behavioral economics to find out what actually motivates us?
Yeah, that's a very good point, Sophie. And I completely agree that it's kind of, it goes back and forth between those. We had maybe historically and like scientific management, those early management models were probably influenced by economics or vice versa, but like had this model of like people are lazy, work is painful, people just want to have leisure and they only go to work because they get paid. And if they're not controlled properly or incentivized, they will not do anything. And then the economic models built that way, and then we're teaching that to a lot of people, and then they think, actually, that might be true. And implement policies that are tailored to people, to those models who like assume people are lazy and don't want to. So
then it becomes a downward spiral.
Yeah, exactly. Then it's kind of it supports each other, but in a negative way. Now, how to get out? Now, one way it's easier. If I would tell you, so let's say there is a plant, and it's not working so well. The shifts, they're actually not so productive. And now you can have to come up in 5 seconds with like either a control or incentivize mechanism to do that. And we kind of all know that, okay, now we have to measure how long they do, and if they fall behind a certain threshold, we take their wage or whatever. It's easy. It comes completely natural, and it's probably relatively simple to implement. I don't think it works, but it's easy to implement. And now I have to think like, now obviously you're an expert on empathy, so you probably know. But if you would ask a random manager, so now think about the empathetic the employee-centric way of doing that, taking motivation into account, it's suddenly much harder. It's like, oh, we have to listen to what they're doing. What is the problem? Understanding where why they're frustrated with certain things. What is about the social interaction? Maybe something about the team is not working.
And I don't have time to deal with it.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's painful. It's hard. It's really hard. And we're not trained in it.
Right.
I mean, most leaders are not trained in understanding really what motivates people beyond those monetary and control mechanism.
So what were the sort of top insights that came from your thesis? Because then you did actually go to work at the Federal Reserve. What was your pathway to learning much about people and how they behave, then coming to the US and going deep into the economic side, and then becoming a professor to bring all these different elements together?
Right. There's a bunch of insights in my thesis. I mean, it's a PhD thesis, so right? You write a lot of stuff in it. But I think high level, I think there is one is people are actually intrinsically motivated to help. They get utility or they get joy out of being helpful, or like they get meaning. They're actually not lazy and they only help if they have to. They actually really enjoy. And we all know that, from introspection, if you did an act of kindness and you helped somebody out and somebody is grateful for that, it actually gives us joy and meaning and identity. That's one. The second is like people are human. And again, that might be not revolutionary, but like people are extremely social creatures. They look about what others do. They want to have approval. They act how others do. They also don't want to be, fairness also matters. They don't want to be the suckers. Okay. You don't want to be like, everybody else helps out. I'm helping out and nobody else does. Everybody else free rides. That hurts tremendously. And people don't, I mean, me included. I mean, I have a very, very strong fairness norm. Yeah. And if I'm pulling my weight and others are not, that really kills my motivation. And that's true in a lot of teams. And those dynamics are very delicate. Creating an atmosphere where, as a group, we all know that. We have been to parent associations or clubs or any organization in school where it's a delicate balance where everybody is engaged and contributes to this public good, compared to like one or two then slack off, and then it goes really, really fast. Right. That like everybody slacks off. And managing that situation where like everybody helps each other is difficult and delicate. And I also did in my PhD then a lot about like how does monetary incentives kind of affect those interactions. So one of the study that then I also did like later, based on my thesis, was like, if you give money, does that kind of interfere with some of those social interactions? Let me give you an example. So if I would we work together, Sophie, and like you go to on the way to the coffee machine, I ask you, Sophie, can you bring me, I'm working right now, can you bring me a coffee back? And I'm assuming now, I'm hoping, you would say, yeah, sure. I mean, why not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, what if I will give you 5 cents? If I would say, Sophie, if you go to the coffee machine, can you bring me I'm working right now, can you bring me a coffee? And I give you 5 cents. Now, you did it for free before. Now you're getting 5 cents in addition. You should be even happier now. Now, if you think a second about this, you was like, I don't know what words you would use, but it wouldn't be pretty. And he was like, F this, I'm not doing it for 5 cents. Yeah. Something when you add money changes in this relationship. Sure. If I would give you $1 million, you would have like, okay, fine, I'll bring you the coffee. But there is something about money that now interacts kind of with this social contract, this reciprocal relationship that we have. Because you might bring me a coffee and like say, well, next time, I go to the copy machine, maybe I bring you the copies that you just printed, or I help you out with a project or whatever, or not. But if you add money, something changes in this relationship, and we have to be really, really careful with adding money. Or like when it's a volunteer, in the office setting and people, we need somebody to organize the holiday party. And we're looking for volunteers to do that. And not everybody wants to volunteer for good reasons. Some have like obligation outside. It's not their thing, whatever. But some will. Now, let's say we start paying for that. We're like saying, okay, if you help with the holiday party, we give you $200. I don't know what the right amount is.
Right.
$300. Now, if you start doing that, it's really, really hard to go back.
Sure.
Like then the spring party, who's volunteered? They're like, ask, so where's the $200 or the whatever X amount of dollars? So if you then translated everything, all interactions into just monetary exchanges, it somehow destroys some of those social relationships and the helping out.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that there doesn't need to be any intrinsic motivation or other non-monetary motivation. I never learned as much, I think, about management as when I was heading up the New York chapter of a nonprofit. We had a lot of work to do, and I had to motivate people who were volunteering for a sort of turnaround situation. And so it was very interesting to me because I really had to think about each individual person and what was going to motivate them specifically, mostly aligning with their skills, not just what their job was, what their business was. All these women had businesses. And so that was very interesting to me to recognize what motivates people in that way. Having delved deeply into these motivating elements, you then moved to the US and you did work at the Federal Reserve. What was that like with the knowledge that you had amassed by that point?
Yeah. I mean, I loved working for the Federal Reserve Bank. I loved the organization. I loved the people there. An organization with a lot of really smart. I mean, I worked in the research department, but there were like a lot of really dedicated, really smart people together. I really loved that. But behavioral economics was not really on their radar.
Sure.
And so I actually started in 2005 in the first Center for Behavioral Economics and Decision Making that the Boston Fed had. So I was not working on, and a lot of people might be relieved. I was not working on inflation or like monetary policy because I don't know that much about them. I was really interested in and trying to think about how can the Federal Reserve, think about people making not optimal decisions and or being not as selfless. So I started then to work a lot on financial decision making, thinking about why do people make mistakes with money? Why are they not safe enough? Why do they have credit card balances that are too high, that they want to reduce, but it's very difficult for them to do. And I then worked in relatively low to moderate income neighborhoods in Boston to organize counseling workshops and doing like research on how can we help people make better decisions when it comes to savings or credit cards.
So this sounds like a crazy deviation, but it takes me back to something we discussed previously, which was related to decision making and how important, for example, it was to eat properly. Do not make a big decision until you've eaten and had some good sleep. And you mentioned this research, which is so profoundly disturbing to me, about the research relating to parole decisions and doing the time of day. Please go into that. How the time of day affects our ability to make good and thoughtful decisions is extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a fascinating study that one of my former colleagues at Columbia did. The idea that he had, we can relate to that. Whenever we're tired and have to occupy it with stuff, we're first of all not making that much good decisions, but in particular, we stick with the status quo. If we have to make changes and we are tired, it's like, let's just do what we always did.
Okay.
I mean, I can relate that with ordering food. It's like, no, let's have just a pizza that I know. What is it? I don't want to venture out.
I'm not feeling brave.
I'm like, just stick with it.
Yeah.
So, which is a funny example. Now, when it comes to parole, it's a little different. So when you're a parole judge, the default, when a case comes, the default is to keep the person in prison. And so what my colleagues did, he looked in the Israeli court system where people come almost randomly to see on parole. So there is there are 20, 30 cases a day, and it starts morning at 9 when the judge just had breakfast. And then there is a couple of cases. Then there is an institutionalized break where the judge has a sandwich or coffee or whatever.
Right.
And then there are a bunch of other cases. Then the judge, he or she has lunch. And there is a bunch of other cases in the first of the afternoon. So his theory was like, well, if they're not hungry, they might stick less to the default, so giving more parole.
Right.
And that's exactly the disturbing result. So people come in the morning asking for parole. The judge is still fresh and not hungry, more likely to give parole. More and more cases, the parole probability of getting parole goes down until he has a sandwich or she has a sandwich. Then paroles go up until lunch. He or she has lunch. After lunch, parole go up. And that just shows the power of those really random circumstantial circumstances that actually affect decision quite dramatically. And you actually see that in work as well, now differently.
Yeah.
When I wrote my book, I thought money is actually not that important, except on the lower end of the income distribution, when you have to think about making ends meet constantly, you actually see, this is another type of tired, when you're always occupied, thinking about, what happens with my kid? How can I actually pay for a potential dental bill that comes up, or how do I make sure I pay for the soccer gear that he or she needs? And there are studies now that systematically look at that, and people are just not as concentrated at work. They can't focus as much. They're less productive.
Yes.
They're not as good in making decisions about quality. And there are scientific studies who can really show that when people are occupied or they don't have enough sandwiches and talking about then they're just not only sticking to the default, they're actually not as good in making decisions in general.
Now, as a professor of economics for Columbia Business School, and so you are not just teaching your students about economics, I'm sure you've integrated behavior economics into there. What has that integration meant to your students as they then go into the business world and utilize economics in their professional and their personal lives?
I mean, I would very much hope so. I hope that they take something away. But you're absolutely right. I try to combine and behavioral economics has both sides, has this behavioral science and this very economics, rational competition aspect to it. So striking the balance is sometimes not so easy, but I think that's actually exactly what is required. So I do think I teach hundreds of students every year about business strategy, how to beat competition. If you're Walmart, how to make really good decisions to beat Dollar General, and making sure that Amazon doesn't overtake you, and so on and so forth. And it kind of goes back from a very rational competition economics way of thinking to then thinking, well, what is actually who makes those decisions? Well, those are humans.
Right.
I mean, they're actually humans on all parts. There are humans who make the decisions. Those are the leaders, the managers who make some of those decisions, and they're limited in their rationality and think very differently
Whether they realize that or not, but
yeah, exactly. Well, we all think we're perfect, and
For sure.
we definitely think we're better than the average. They're the managers or the executives. Then there are customers who are limited in their rationality and also care about other aspects than just the value they get out of a product. And then there are the employees who care about other things than money and like are influenced by those social pressures. And so on all three levels, kind of behavioral economics kick in. And we have to think about, why do managers make certain decisions and not? So I have for example, I have a research paper where I look at, we sometimes paint manager as those cold calculators who like just make decisions but they're humans as well. And one painful, very, very painful decision is getting rid of people. I don't think any manager, well, the very few manager get a joy out of letting people go because it's painful. They know that it's really hard. So I looked at whether in states where they just increase the unemployment benefit, where kind of the landing of those who get laid off is a little softer, whether managers, in particular those where we classified as pro-social, are more likely to like let people go, make actually those hard decisions, which are painful for them personally.
Right.
I think, I mean, you see it all the time when you ask executive, what's the hardest you have to do, is like laying people off. It sucks.
Yeah.
And they're humans as well. So there are humans there, and then employees, obviously, that's the customer. So I try to integrate that and hope my students will, when they go out, make those really economic decisions about competition in mind that they're not perfect, the customers are not perfect, and the employees are not perfect and have like sometimes very different motivators than like the traditional economic models have.
So in the current environment, I mean the last probably 5 to 10 years, there's been so much customer-centric focus. With good cause, those are the people who are buying our products, and then the lifetime value of a customer, all incredibly important for the success of our business. And it is so much more complicated. They have more information, they have more understanding. We're intersecting with them at a very different moment in this whole sales cycle. So trying to get inside their heads and empathize, all that is so much more complex than it used to be. So a lot of emphasis and understanding on customers is certainly valid. How are you seeing the move now towards what I see as the whole human-centric system? There's the customer journey and the customer experience and the employee journey and the employee experience. Have you seen that evolving over the last 10 years? Obviously, you've written your book because you believe that we haven't got there enough, and you're sharing much more of your data. So I'm curious as to how your students have, over the last decade, been changing their reception of how you have been talking to them about the importance of the employee-centric model that they are then energized by or latching onto and leaning into as they go back out into the business world again.
Yeah. I think that's a very important point you're making, Sophie, and like thinking about the customer and like why we got to customer centricity and whether the same trends also affect kind of the employees, I think is really important. And I argue and tell now everybody that like I think the employees are the new customers, and somehow customers got more power in the last 10, 20 years. And I think there are a bunch of reasons why. One is there is more competition. You have to be agile. You have to innovate constantly and figure out what's the experience.
Right.
Now, guess who is doing the agility? They're the employees.
Right.
Like it's the workforce. So that trend also like leads to probably we need the employees more. The second is transparency about brands increased tremendously with social media, review sites like TripAdvisor. Now you can actually look whether that restaurant you're going to in Rome, whether that restaurant is any good.
Yes.
Before you couldn't.
Right.
It was really difficult. I mean, we had like Lonely Planet. And
if your friend didn't know that place, then you wouldn't go there. And
and then you hit a lot of tourist traps.
Yep.
Tourist traps are going to go away because like there is much more, we know much more about the experience. I mean, Jeff Bezos says, like, if you screw up offline, the customer tells 6 people, and if you screw up online, he or she tells 6,000 people. And I think what that transparency now also hits the workplace. It's very difficult to know, is that organization a real good organization or not? What's the culture? More and more with like Glassdoor, Indeed, and also like if you screw up, it goes viral. If you have a scandal, it goes viral. So that's the second. The third is that we have more data about customer. Figuring out what Netflix and Amazon is doing, figuring out what Sophie or Stephan really want was really hard 30 years ago. Now we actually know, they know more and more. And I think there is more and more data about the employee as well. So we can actually start to personalize as well in the workplace. And last but not least, maybe through all of those, preferences change. As customers, we are used to different personalized experience. And maybe the younger generations are like, when I grew up, like my biggest fights I had with my sister, I have one sister, was like about TV, watching TV, because we had one TV and there was one TV program. So there was only one 7 o'clock showtime. So we fought over I can watch. And my sister is 3 years older. She wanted to watch the exact opposite of what I wanted to watch. And we had literally physical fights about this.
Oh, goodness.
And now I have a household of 5.
Yep.
There is no fights about TV. I mean, we still do have a TV, but everybody watches on their device whenever they want, whatever they want.
Right.
My kids don't know that there was a time before 2-day delivery. They think like stuff comes right now. And it's like back in the days, waited weeks for stuff. So somehow that changes kind of what we're expecting as customer, but that obviously it's the same human beings that are now also work in the workplace.
And I think that connection is also clearer. I think COVID did highlight that because we understood that our employees and our customers, everybody was having a very difficult time. And that we also saw not only our own behaviors changing, but we could really connect that very clearly with how customers' behaviors were changing and continue to change.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so I think like there are the same trends that led to customer centricity lead to employee centricity. And now I think the other thing why employees might be the new customer, we actually have a lot of tools about customers that we can now apply to employees. You mentioned customer journeys. We can, of course, apply that to employee journeys. We can figure out what are like the pain points, what are the moments that matter, or whatever you want to call those, for our employees to actually delight them as well. I mean, I often say if you would go to a marketing executive and say, do you think it's a good idea to ask your customer once a year how they're doing? They would laugh their asses off. Of course not. It's like we need constant feedback and innovation. Actually, Bezos said the greatest thing about the customers is they're so unhappy all the time. And because they're so unhappy, I can always figure out new ways to improve. Now, with employees, we ask them once a year in surveys. We ignore it. Everybody knows that we ignore it, so nobody participates in the first place. But we have the tools kind of from customer centricity already, and can now most of them apply to also thinking about the employee experience.
I do see our current business environment where there's so much change, even before AI came in and caused even more disruptions and more uncertainty, not just in terms of changing customer behaviors, but how the employees' jobs are going to change and are changing. How do you see companies leaning into this idea of employee centricity? We do have a tight labor market, may not feel that way. There are some layoffs still. And I forget which company it was that was saying that they are doing some layoffs and hiring at the same time. It's much more about shifting people, and hopefully there's more moving people internally, which is still very hard. But in terms of where we are, how people need to be upskilled and reskilled and managing through this change, therefore needing more of a employee or a talent-focused and a human-centric orientation to be able to manage through all this change effectively.
The pace of change is so extreme that we absolutely have to change how we manage the workforce as well. And I want to say there are two things. So one is we have to be careful with you, again, thinking about what really motivates people and then implementing technology in order to not destroy this, but actually enhance it. And going back to, if we have a model, we talked before about like lazy employees. If we think people are lazy and we want to control, technology gives us the amazing tools to control to the level that we never could before. Yeah. I know everything you're doing. I can listen into what you're doing. I can surveil you in a degree that like Frederick Taylor, the father of scientific management, would have just dreamed of, who did it like with paper and pencil. But that would be exactly destroying everything about this trusting relationship, or what I call in my book, autonomy and a matter of trust, which is really important. So that's one. We have to be really careful about this. I also think like, because it goes so fast, we do have to empower employees more. Top-down works really well when it's relatively stable and not changing in work environment. When it's moving fast, you have to change. And you see that in organizations where, like, if you integrate more AI, if you have more AI, normally the hierarchical structure become flatter. The hierarchies become flatter. Right. Because now you actually need teams who like work more autonomously. You empower them. And it's a very different way of managing because you now have to trust them as well, or upskilling. It's very, very difficult to do this as a planned top-down. You have to create marketplace, those internal marketplaces that now some companies have. Yep. But it empowers, it kind of gives more power to the employees. Yeah. It's kind of, I sometimes say it's almost like the Netflix of upskilling, because what it does is figuring out, there is Sophie, there is Stephan, there's John, whatever. They have different ambitions, different skills. They want to do something. And now we need to match them with opportunities within the organization and constantly update. Now I was on a social media project in whatever. Yeah. And now the system needs to know, maybe now I know more about social media. Right. And needs to show me more. Yes. And that's hard to do, but that's exactly what Netflix does. Kind of. Right. It figures out like Sophie likes to watch whatever, crime drama series, whatever. Yes. And let's show her more of those. Yep. And once she gets tired of them, I see that, now she actually watches more nature documentaries. Let's show her more nature documentaries and so on. And so those internal marketplaces that companies like MasterCard or MetLife or whatever implement are doing that exactly that. They're empowering employees and matching them to opportunities. Use AI kind of as a tool to improve.
And that's one of the places that I see AI being hugely powerful to facilitate a very difficult math problem in terms of moving people around and understanding their skills, mapping their skills, and then being able to track appropriately what they enjoy doing, what they're good at doing, what they get good feedback on, and then saying, hey, Stephan, there's a project 3 departments over. I can tell that you might have a bit of spare time, so do you want to try and do that? So I think there's some very powerful things coming up, which very few companies have got there yet. Yes, that are going to also allow people to use different aspects of their skill base, use more of it and develop more of it as everything is evolving so fast. There's always so much to do with human behavior that I find fascinating. I guess I'll have 2 questions. First of all, what have I not asked you that I should have done? And then secondly, I would like you to give a few tips for companies who are looking to take the first steps in a more human-centric approach to managing their talent?
What have you not asked me? There is so many. As we had such a great conversation. I mean, we could talk about so many aspects of it, but maybe I say something about that leads up to then the second question.
Okay.
It is obviously not so easy to do. And what is top of mind, I'm teaching my elective, The Future of Work, right now. And tomorrow we talk about remote work. And remote work is difficult because for many reasons, but it kind of taps into two motivators that I talk about in opposite ways.
Okay.
One is people like flexibility, autonomy, and if you want to maximize that, you let people work whenever they want, decide themselves when they come. But another really important motivator is what I call working together works. It's relatedness, having social interactions, talking to each other, have the energy. And if you want to maximize that, maybe in-person interactions are more important. Actually, we need now to coordinate.
Right.
You can't
it's
decide.
That combination, yes.
Yeah, we need kind of to do both. And that makes it now so difficult because on one hand, we want to, most companies hopefully want to, I'm a big proponent of hybrid work.
Yeah.
So I do think you want to give them flexibility, but you also want to balance it with kind of the other aspect. So that makes it tricky.
I also am a strong proponent of flexibility, and I couple flexibility with hybrid. We need to learn how to do this effectively. It's a new way of working, and we need to really understand it. And yet we have some companies, some CEOs who are now saying everybody needs to be back in the office again. These are the outliers. There are a few of them, and they're big ones. Obviously, I'm referring to Amazon in particular amongst those. From a behavioral economics point of view, research-based, what do you think is really driving that?
Well, one is, it's hard to change, even if you're a leader. You grew up, if you're a leader, you grew up in a certain environment, and that was an in-person office environment, and you're really good at this. That's why you're at the top of the organization. You were really good in figuring out what the mentoring, the learning, the social interaction, the politics in this environment are, and you're used to leading in that particular environment. And now to change, as you said about learning, we now need to relearn because you can't do the same in a hybrid that you did before. Now, I actually think we were phoning it in before. Yeah. A little bit.
I don't think we were so good at it, but it was familiar.
Yes, it was familiar. And it was those who are on top of the organization were quote unquote successful in it. They were the ones who managed it. But I think we were phoning it in certain aspect. I teach a lot of executives about the future of work, and remote work comes up, and then they always say those, all those negatives that we all heard of. So let's say well, the water cooler or kombucha moments are not there, and kombucha tap moments. And I say well, how did you do it before? And first of all, they were hoping that those happened. They were not intentional about them.
It was totally coincidental.
Yes, that's one. And second, we're not having kombucha tap moment 40 hours a week.
Right.
We can actually be very intentional about this. Or there is the culture. There is another one. Oh, culture suffers. And then I say well, when we were all in the office, 50% of offices had toxic work culture. Just because we're together doesn't make it great. In fact, I can be much nastier in person than if I'm on Zoom. A lot of people don't want to go back to the office because the work environment is terrible in the office. Yeah. Now, I do think there is something really powerful being together.
For sure.
But we have to be intentional about this. And again, we're not doing 40 hours a week of being working on our culture.
Leaving these very important serendipitous moments to serendipity.
Yes, exactly. And we figured out 2 days of the week, we're doing nothing. We call it weekend. There is no kombucha tap moment on the week, hopefully. There is no culture building. And nothing is, we're not falling apart. In fact, we think that's a good thing to have, and we want to protect that. Now, why can't we have like a remote day work or 2 days where we shift around some of it needs coordination. That's true with the weekend as well. We needed to coordinate and not everybody is so good,
That's so true. That's interesting.
But we decided let's make sure. Let's hope we're not sending. We don't have to expect people to reply until Monday and so on and so forth.
Right.
Sometimes we can. Sometimes there's exceptions. Obviously, why can't we have Focus Fridays or Focus Thursday Fridays?
But you're so right, because when the 5-day work week. It was a Welsh utopian who came up with that idea. But when that was first introduced, of course it had to be coordinated, and everybody managed to do it.
Yeah. But I think now going to your question about like what managers can do to change, I think one is just to realize, we started about the lazy employees and whatever, seeing kind of that, having this mindset shift that in order to create good business outcome, treating your employees well is not either or. It's win-win. It's like with customer centricity, treating them amazing, delighting them, investing money to delight them actually helps us make more money. And I think the same is true for employees. However, in order to do that, you need to, and that's maybe the second, understand what really motivates them. Customers, if you ask customers, what do they like in a product? They say low prices is one.
Right.
But that's not customer centricity. Customer centricity is not like lowering the price. It's like figuring out, but what do they also like? The experience, the personal touch, the value, the purpose, whatever. And the same with our employees. Money is important, but it's not all. We actually need to understand really critically what motivates people and what are like the fundamental, and we know actually a lot from behavioral economics what motivates people. And so in the book, I'm going to talk about those 4 motivators and what to do concretely to improve those. And I think third is to the question you asked me before those 2 about technology, using technology in a way that enhances those motivators and doesn't destroy them, and also use them as a help. As leaders, whether you organize a multinational organization or a team of 3, you still have to, you're overwhelmed. There is a lot to do. Yeah. And so now how can we use technology to actually support us as either emerging leaders or CEO to actually make teams and the organization work better? Because we now use technology and our human capabilities.
Stephan, thank you so much for your time. It's been very, very interesting to understand your journey and the economic and human behavioral research that goes behind everything that you bring and what you're sharing with both your students and everybody else through your book. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sophie, for having me. That was a lovely conversation, very insightful. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks again so much to Stephan Meier, professor at Columbia Business School and author of The Employee Advantage. You can find out more about Stephan on LinkedIn and on his website, stephanmeier.com, stephanmeier.com. You can find his book at your preferred on- and offline book retailers. Immediate action tip. To achieve a more employee-centric approach, tap into 2 motivators: flexibility, giving people autonomy about how, when, where to work, and relatedness, having social interactions which include in person. If you are finding the new business and work environment hard to navigate, reach out to me for executive mentorship, as well as effective, empathy-centered programs to enable multi-generational distributed leaders, managers, and teams to up-level rapidly for modern work and be ready for whatever lies ahead. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and like it. You can also write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated, useful articles, research, and information, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. Thanks for listening. Until next time.